When it comes to human beings, there are few perfect dichotomies. It's not about healthy versus unhealthy, narcissistic versus not narcissistic. It's about ranges and continuums. And this becomes particularly important when we are thinking about that sort of crossover point of unhealthy and narcissistic when we are thinking about relationships. So let's talk about how, again, narcissistic relationships aren't simple and they kind of go beyond just annoyance and irritation. So in the past several months, the most frequent critique and feedback I get is, come on, Dr. Ramani, isn't this word narcissism overused? Everyone is saying that a person they don't like is narcissistic. Everyone on TikTok is making these videos about narcissism. They can't all be in narcissistic relationships, can they? Well, to me, the big problem that comes out of the overuse and the everywhere-ness of the word narcissism is that people who are really going through these relationships and really getting hurt to them, especially at the moderate to severe end, are being hurt, like deeply hurt, like wounds that can linger for a lifetime hurt. It's not that person, it's not the point here is not that a person is either narcissistic or not. It's that having the traits and behaviors and that having these traits and that these traits and behaviors are consistent over time, and they may not be seen by everyone because narcissistic people are actually too socially perceptive to let that happen. It's often what I do call it, typically it's a behind closed door patterns, but not doors pattern, but not always. But you see it consistently, and you see the shifting between the good days and the bad. And above all else, being consistently exposed to these patterns, especially in big ticket relationships, like a spouse or a partner or a parent or even a boss or a colleague for a long time, like years, takes a toll on the person in the relationship. Confusion, rumination, self-blame, regret, powerlessness, helplessness, self-doubt, loneliness, a sense of alienation, a lack of trust in yourself and the world. And this stuff can persist even after the relationship is over. Well, what about in mild narcissistic relationships? Isn't what's happening there, isn't that just annoyance? Not necessarily. Mild narcissistic folks tend not to be experienced as being as toxic because their traits aren't as pronounced. For example, their dysregulation and rage are not as scary. They may have the traits that are less interpersonally toxic. For example, the more mild narcissistic may have the more me, look at me, aren't I great, selfie obsessed, appearance obsessed, never call you when you're going through a hard time, but expect you to be their shrink on call when they are kind of thing. They may have lots of friends or a large social network because they're fun and they're extroverted. These relationships, yes, they are annoying and irritating. But if this was your parent, it was not an easy way to grow up. And you likely had to be the parent to them as a child. If this is your partner, it is definitely not always easy to keep a household running because basically it's like having another kid, except it's a kid with a lot of power. So no, narcissistic relationships are not just a person who's annoying and irritating. The big difference is that they hurt. And this is where the social media quick clip video conversation about narcissism tends to come into question. When people post content implying that their relationship is annoying or irritating, and that's because this partner is narcissistic, it can feel like, oh, narcissism just means that a person is annoying, which is a pretty low bar. Or people who are really going through narcissistic relationships and suffering are told, oh, come on, you're just in a relationship with someone annoying, let it go. Narcissistic relationships really deeply wound people. In childhood, these relationships shape our sense of self and frankly our personalities and how we go through the world. It doesn't mean we're ruined or we don't become productive people. In fact, many of the most productive people I know had narcissistic parents. And I think that's because of the perfectionism that a child carries out of those kinds of families as a defense. But it means being a hurt person and struggling with core wounds and fragmentation and hypervigilance and trust and never quite feeling quite enough for a long time. In adulthood, it's not just a broken heart. It's a broken heart where you feel crazy, and that infects your soul and your mind. It's far more than an annoyance or an irritation. Listen, betrayal hurts, but betrayal that you are blamed for, that messes with your mind. And it stays with you, and it makes the very thing that we need to heal, friendships and new healthy relationships, harder to get because it's harder to trust. It's the never being sure of ourselves. It's the hours wasted in rumination. It's the fear we aren't seeing it right. It's the belief that having feelings is selfish. It's the constant discomfort that comes from asking for even the simplest needs to be met. It's the mantra of, I don't deserve fill in the blank. I don't deserve happiness, success, whatever. It's the belief that when happiness does come, that it will be fleeting. What happens to most people who experience narcissistic abuse sits in a gray zone between the fallout of complex trauma and heartbreak. It's neither of those things. It's something unique. And people who endure narcissistic relationships are often quite functional. I would even say too functional. Really work hard and succeed, or overwork, or are perfectionistic. It's sort of, again, overworking and trying to be perfectionistic is sort of a socially valued way to dissociate and stay in the trauma-bonded patterns that somehow, if we could get it right and be enough, it would all be okay. This is not a mere annoyance or irritation. This is stuff that scrambles our insides. So if you are looking at content that implies that the narcissistic relationship is merely an annoyance, and by extension, then it feels like you are being a bit fussy at having such a strong reaction to it, I think that misses the boat and simplifies it. As I do, I did a deep reflection on this myself. I have some folks in my life that are an irritation. Their quirks, their ways of being, these little things that are annoying. But these people are not narcissistic. They do have empathy, and they're not entitled or manipulative or pathologically selfish. They don't need admiration. They're not excessively competitive or anything like that. They're just annoying. I am not hurt by them. I am irritated, yeah. Sometimes I roll my eyes if I need to deal with them. I don't really want to spend more time with them than I have to. But I'm not hurt, and I don't ruminate, and I don't doubt myself, nor do I have a sense of shame or feel anxious at the thought of being with them or after being with them. Now, when I compare that experientially to the narcissistic people in my life, it's not even the same thing. With the truly narcissistic people in my life, I feel guilt. I feel grief. I have somatic reactions like a tightening in my throat and a tension in my body. I feel anger and anxiety and injustice. I try to think of ways to get out of it. I always feel depleted afterwards. I question life and I lose trust in myself. That is not irritation, folks. And an annoying person would never leave us feeling like that. So turn this video into an exercise for yourself. You can, after you listen to this part, you can even pause the video. But grab a piece of paper and draw it in half, like make a line in half, and write annoying on one side and narcissistic on the other. And list the names or initials of people you know who fit those two columns for you. And then you can write it out or just pay attention. How do you feel when you're with them or after you've been with them? The differences will be very clear. So let's not muddy the waters of this conversation about narcissism by calling every single person who gets under our skin narcissistic. This is a lot more complicated than that. And simplifying it to just being mere irritation can impede the real healing and frankly understanding the suffering of people who are going through this. What is a healthy behavior? Or what is healthy behavior in a relationship? I would argue it's honesty, behaving in a trustworthy manner, being self-reflective, being self-aware, being able to appropriately regulate emotions, balance, respect, fostering psychological safety, kindness, compassion. It's behaviors that leave the other person in the relationship feeling like they can be their true selves and it'll be okay. It's certainly not about being perfect. And when mistakes are made, that there is a taking of responsibility, of being aware of the hurt to someone else that the behavior resulted in. It's about making genuine apologies and changing behavior. Healthy relationships are about being present and not just showing up when you want or need something. And this framework would imply what a healthy relationship is across all kinds of relationships, intimate relationships, friendships, family relationships. Healthy is healthy. Well, obviously, these healthy behaviors in any kind of consistent manner would be a heavy lift or pretty darn near impossible for a narcissistic person. By definition, narcissistic relationships are one-sided. They exist to serve the narcissistic person's needs, and generally, they do not feel psychologically safe. But is there an in-between place? People who are not healthy in relationships or who don't engage in healthy behavior, but that are not narcissistic. And obviously the answer to that is, oh yes, obviously there is. And this group of people can be very confusing. You may say, oh, I know they're not narcissistic. In fact, they're often great, but conflict and tension brings up something really messed up in them. Or they do get really worked up, but then they also apologize. Or you find that it is difficult for them to admit that they are wrong or that they're responsible for something, or they tend to come in hot and dysregulated. And while they will calm down with some time, it does mean you do need to do a bit of eggshell walking around them. However, this can be very situation specific. You may even know exactly what their triggers are. For example, if they feel that they are being left out, or they are caught in a lie, or arguments or conflict make them panicky and they escalate really fast, or they go silent when they don't know how to manage a situation. But when things are running smoothly, the relationship's generally fine. Maybe this is a person who's rough around the edges, but you would definitely not say, it doesn't feel like, and it wouldn't say that they're narcissistic. And this matters because narcissism as a personality style is a much more enveloping concept. It's who the person is, it's their personality, and it means that even when there is no trigger situation and just to be dominant, or maybe the trigger situation is so vague and something that activated shame in them in a really, really subtle way, they continue to gaslight and get in their little digs. And while your not healthy but not narcissistic friend or partner or family member may not violate your trust or betray you, betrayal is kind of a universal in narcissistic relationships. When you are in a not healthy but not narcissistic relationship, you may even find yourself saying something like, ugh, I love this person. It's just that they lose it when they are not invited to something, even something boring, and it's not even like a fun thing to go to. And so I don't ask them to come because I'm trying to save them the headache of feeling that they have to show up. But you don't typically feel, though, unsafe or unseen around them. Other things that may happen in an unhealthy but not narcissistic relationship is that you are managing what feel like intense sort of problems in them, like little foibles maybe. It can feel extra, but it's not the same kind of unsafe, confusing, or crazy making of the narcissistic relationship. However, in this not healthy person, you may find that it is not always easy to create and foster change in them. And they may continue to act out or behave badly even when you have talked about something with them. This gray zone can be confusing, And this gray zone is also a reminder of why it is not necessary that everything needs to fit or meet the definition of narcissism in order for it to be unhealthy. Your not healthy but not narcissistic friend or partner or family member, they may still be a real handful. And you know that this relationship can be tiring, even exhausting. You may actually watch what you say around them. But you may also find yourself doing this to protect this other person, this not healthy but not narcissistic person who seems to lack a certain set of coping skills. And you don't necessarily find yourself wondering what is wrong with you or blaming yourself for this not healthy but not narcissistic person's bad behavior. You may be pretty clear on what is happening and recognize, this is not a healthy relationship, but it is also not leaving you feeling confused, crazy, and upside down. When it comes to human beings, there are few perfect dichotomies. It's not about healthy versus unhealthy, narcissistic versus not narcissistic. It's about ranges and continuums. And this becomes particularly important when we are thinking about that sort of crossover point of unhealthy and narcissistic when we are thinking about relationships. It's not as simple as this is an unhealthy relationship, so I must be in a relationship with someone narcissistic. It may be, but it also may be that this is an unhealthy relationship because of the patterns and the behaviors. And knowing that some of these behaviors and patterns may bother some people more or less than other people. That's why some people who are not healthy but not narcissistic actually might do fine with someone else who has a different backstory than you. We have never really been taught that some patterns in relationships are not healthy, especially if we grew up in an unhealthy family or observing unhealthy relationships. That's half the battle. And unhealthy relational patterns don't mean that we have to run screaming away right away. It may mean we need to pay attention. And the earlier we do that, the more discerning we can be and figure out sort of the most comfortable path forward and also maintain realistic expectations for the limitations of the relationship. Now, of course, all bets are off if this is a narcissistic relationship. But in relationships that are simply not healthy but not narcissistic, you may have more options. Many not healthy but not narcissistic relationships can be actually managed at some level for the long term. And there may be some internal eye rolling or having to gird and strengthen yourself at times, and also a lot of empathy from your side, as well as attempts for this not always healthy person to try to make amends. And their apologies might actually even feel genuine, and you might even see them trying to do a little better. And it may not always feel easy, but you may also not feel as though you're being dismantled and broken down in the relationship. What are the things that can contribute to a relationship being not healthy but not narcissistic? There are different things. Sometimes people who are may have unaddressed or post-traumatic stress or complex trauma, you might see some of these patterns come up. Other personality styles could bring this up. Other antagonistic personality styles, but then that's going to feel more narcissistic. People who might have mild depression or even cycles of depression, you might have some of these experiences. Sometimes people who are living with addiction, or maybe in the early stages of recovery from addiction, you might see some of these patterns. But what you also, like I said, the key is to remember, you might also have that backstory, but above all else, what you're not doing is engaging, you're not confused, you're not engaging in self-blame. And many times in not healthy but not narcissistic people, you're going to see that their not healthiness tends to persist across situations. So they're struggling with some of these dynamics at work, with other friends. Like, it's no secret. No one is surprised, like, oh, this is a little bit of a struggle. But there's also some shows of good faith. You will see an attempt to do it. There will be almost a sense of wholeness or a little bit of justice. You feel that, like, okay, they're acknowledging this. Like, I don't feel crazy. Once you lift that sense of not feeling crazy in a relationship, its odds are that it's not narcissistic. Again, but it also may not be healthy. However, this idea that not all unhealthy relationships are narcissistic is a real misnomer, and it actually misses an opportunity for people to figure out how to navigate relationships in their life that they still value, but also find challenging without just sort of writing them off as these are narcissistic relationships. It's all a lot more subtle than that. What's the difference between emotional immaturity and narcissism? Everyone tries to find ways to skirt using that dirty word, narcissism. To call people difficult, toxic, volatile, confusing, clueless, unfiltered, self-centered, egotistical. It's unfortunate because if someone is indeed narcissistic, the word narcissism captures the whole thing, all the jagged edges. It's not just someone who is selfish. It's not just someone who is unfiltered. But what's the deal with this whole emotional immaturity thing? Does calling it emotional immaturity make this whole narcissism conversation more palatable? Does it make it feel less accusey? Personally, I don't think getting a handle on someone's personality is accusatory. I think it's healthy and it's frankly strategic and puts us in a better position to have realistic expectations for the relationship. And in fact, if you are really empathic, if you know someone's personality, you may even be in a better position to protect them. Listen, I have agreeable friends who I know will go out of their way for me, but I never want to take advantage of them. It's just, I just don't. That wouldn't feel good to me. So I'm very careful to not lean on them too much, lest I burn them out. Does that make sense? So we can have an empathic reaction to someone else's personality. And if you have someone antagonistic in your life, well, then you know that this is not going to be a fully emotionally safe or buttoned up or well put together person, and you're going to need to tread more lightly. And if you can do that early, it means you can actually hold some space for some very difficult people in your life. But if you let them in too deep, then you have a real psychological mess on your hands. So, what's the difference between emotional immaturity and narcissism? I guess maybe the question is there a difference? And more importantly, do we sometimes use this sort of lighter term of emotional immaturity that seems almost like a forgivable quirk to shame and blame and confuse folks who are in these relationships and continue to give folks who behave in an unempathic and in an invalidating ways, to give them a pass. So narcissism, I've said this a million times, I'll now say it 1,000,001, it's on this continuum, on this spectrum, from mild to really severe. At the really severe end, we have all the malignant narcissism, psychopathy adjacent, dark tetrad, coercive, scary shit. At the mild end, that tends to be the more superficial, unaware, selfish, emotionally immature stuff. And I think in most cases, when we use this term emotionally immature, we may be capturing some of the milder narcissistic patterns, as well as patterns that may not be fully narcissism. They don't have all the stuff, right? Emotional immaturity is lots of things. And unlike narcissism, it's not always as well defined. It's used conversationally. Emotional immaturity takes in territory like adolescent selfishness, infantile tantrums, high school triangulation and gossip. People who are emotionally immature have a lack of patience with situations that would require patience, such as raising children. It is impulsivity. It's not considering consequences. It's emotional dysregulation, and it's a lack of self-awareness. And as a rule, here is what emotional immaturity is not. It is not cruelly manipulative. It is not necessarily heavy gaslighting, unless the gaslighting is a sort of pathetic maneuver to wiggle out of a situation. Things like, I never said that. Stop being a jerk. I didn't do that, but I bet you did. I mean, this isn't high end, like the kind of gaslighting that makes you think I've lost it. If the emotionally immature person is exploitative, it's mildly so, like being really nice to you because they want your concert tickets or to swim in your swimming pool. But it doesn't feel like emotional extortion level taking advantage of you. Emotionally immature people do not tend to be coercive. Emotionally immature people can betray you, but it doesn't have the sinister feel of what we see happening in more antagonistic relationships. The emotionally immature person is getting a blowjob at a bachelor party. The more moderate to severe narcissistic person is having a more elaborate and unapologetic affair, or has more than one and is denying it and calling you crazy when you point out changes in their behavior. So both are obviously betrayal, but they definitely feel different. The betrayal of the emotionally immature person feels more impulsive, childish, crime of passion, YOLO kind of nonsense. So some of you may be thinking, well, if it's just that, I guess, yeah, it hurts, it doesn't feel good, but it's not the next level stuff of the more moderate and more severe narcissism. So maybe it's not that big a deal. Well, some of that depends on the nature of the relationship you are in with them. If you have an emotionally immature parent, you end up having to be more friend than child. You are parentified and have to take on roles that you are not ready for, but that you also know that if you don't, then it will be a mess. And by the age of 8, you might have already found yourself trying to pull together a lunchbox for your 5-year-old sibling, or fill out your own school forms, or figure out how to get dinner started. Children of emotionally immature parents may endure various forms of emotional neglect. The emotionally immature parent will do things like compare their situation to the child, saying that the emotionally immature parent might say things like, "You think you have it hard? Let me tell you how hard my day was." And sometimes the emotionally immature parent will expect the child to hang out with them and be their sidekick and their best friend, when the child would rather be with their peers, and then the child is left feeling guilty and not wanting to be their immature parent's friend. As you get older, it may even get into the uncomfortable realm of your emotionally immature parent flirting with your friends or asking them inappropriate questions. The emotionally immature parent may put themselves on the same playing field as you and your peers, perhaps even dressing in a way that, or dressing in a manner that doesn't feel age appropriate, and making you feel as though your parent is trying to sort of exist as your equal. And again, this whole idea of like, we're best friends. Children of emotionally immature parents may feel abandoned insofar as their parent wasn't a parent. And in some cases, emotionally immature parents can actually be fun, right? They'll throw themselves with reckless abandon into childlike activities, but then they do not have the capacity to do things like setting limits and boundaries and the kind of caregiving a child needs. And all of this can foster a unique trauma bond, with the child perhaps actually kind of really enjoying this emotionally immature, fun parent, but feeling let down at other times, or even resentful and abandoned and not having a parent who's a grown-up, and then feeling guilty because their parent is actually more fun than the other parents, or even their other parent, who have all these bedtime rules and stuff like that, or even your other parent who has bedtime rules and stuff like that. So you better believe the emotionally immature parent can take a toll, but may not leave the child with that sense of subjugation, that the child cannot ever be their true self, that to express a need is a violation of the social contract of the family, or ultimately with that sense of feeling not enough. Children of emotionally immature parents may not get their needs met, at least not by the emotionally immature parent, but they may not be as consistently shamed for asking for the needs to be met. And sometimes then the child often just has to figure them out themselves. The impact of the emotionally immature parent will be really magnified if the child does not have another adult present, another parent who is an adult and can do adult things like caregive and set limits and boundaries, or other caregivers or other family members such as caring grandparents to support the child. But all of this is in contrast to the child of the narcissistic parent, who is often kept in the confusing prison of rules, expectations, neglect, anger, fear, competitiveness, abandonment, and vigilance. It's different. It feels different. The other place this whole emotional immaturity thing makes an impact, though maybe not as profound as the narcissistic personality, obviously, is in intimate relationships. Listen, these relationships may be really fun in the beginning with an emotionally immature person, but once it starts coming down to real adulting, filing taxes, paying the bills, planning for the future, any kind of adulting, and most importantly, raising kids, it's not so easy. Emotionally immature partners may play video games for endless hours and spend wastefully and stay late at happy hour and still want to run their social lives like they're 21 without a care in the world. And the partner of an emotionally immature person may find themselves having to take the sole role of grown-up, killjoy, and disciplinarian. You become the parent, and that is not fun. Resentment can grow, and you feel like you're in a relationship with Peter Pan. That loses its luster when you're trying to live real life. On top of that, emotionally immature people can be inappropriate, can engage in betrayal that feels more careless, engage in careless behavior, and be irresponsible. And the trauma bond here can look like they're sweet and they're so much fun. They bring out the little kid in me, but I am exhausted. And they treat me like I'm a buzzkill. And so you're saying to them, no, we can't just smoke weed and play video games this afternoon. Like, we have to get this paperwork done. There are few things less sexy than having to be your partner's parent and scolder. And if you're raising kids with them, you have to be the grown-up parent, which often puts you in this tough, triangulated space of you not being the fun parent, of you having to always make the rules happen, and then the other parent gets to be the fun parent and often isn't having to do all the other heavy lifting of parenting. And you may say like, okay, this isn't the narcissistic relationships I'm reading about, but I'm still really exhausted. But here's what's interesting. This emotionally immature partner is not likely to be engaging in higher level manipulation. You may not be left confused by this relationship. Instead, you may feel frustrated, annoyed, and angry. Your own self-blame may be the eye roll of, I can't believe I put up with this BS. The emotionally immature partner may not have that capacity to wait until you're behind closed doors to hurl their hurtful words and be charming in front of other people the way the narcissistic people are. The emotionally immature person just be their emotionally immature selves everywhere. And many other people may just be charmed by that childish behavior. But the emotionally stunted person's behavior doesn't have that calculated feel, like waiting until we get in the car to yell at you. The emotionally immature partner will not gaslight you with the same level of sophistication. The emotionally immature partner may be dysregulated and throw tantrums when they don't get their way. But it may not be as much of the shaming or the overwhelming rage or the silent treatment as much as sort of the sullen grumpiness of an aggrieved adolescent or the insistent whining of a child. With an emotionally immature partner, you may not feel like you're upside down or have lost your mind or isolated, and other people around you may actually get it. But as I said, they may also be sort of charmed by the emotionally immature person's way of being, especially if it is not destroying their day-to-day. It feels different, folks. I've actually walked many, many people through these emotionally immature relationships. And I personally actually have been through both kinds of relationships. The emotionally immature relationships are exhausting and they're annoying. But they're also sometimes sweet. While the narcissistic relationships are a bit more soul-crushing, crazy-making, shaming, and isolating. And we feel panicky at the thought of losing them until we get it. Interestingly, we do not actually feel as psychologically unsafe in an emotionally immature relationship. Instead, we may just sort of feel pissed off and aggravated and put out and tired of having to be the only adult in the room or always having to clean up the messes. And sort of the trauma and safety responses we have may not be as pronounced. Now, can some emotionally immature people be narcissistic? Of course. In fact, a substantial proportion of them may very well be. Emotional immaturity in and of itself is a hallmark of all types and all levels of narcissism. But at the same time, there are a lot of emotionally immature people who actually probably don't quite level up to narcissism. They get very close, and it may be narcissism light. Their lack of empathy feels more like emotional stuntedness. And unlike narcissistic people who can turn on the empathy for and be regulated in front of people that they value more than you, that they value you, the emotionally immature person is like a kid who kind of treats everyone uniformly. So that shifting of the narcissistic relationship that can leave us feeling uniquely devalued isn't a thing in the emotionally immature relationship. Interestingly, we can make some emotionally immature relationships work. Friendships that we are not, for example, overly reliant on. Some workplace relationships that they can still get the job done. Even some family relationships with people, again, that we're not reliant on. Some emotionally immature friendships can actually be a little bit fun. A great night out, great at a party, fun on a beach day. But you may not want to loan them money or start a business with them or count on them to talk you through a real problem or be there for you in any consistent way. But it is important that we are aware of these distinctions, because I see a lot of people who are in genuinely full throttle narcissistic relationships be shut down by this emotional immaturity conversation with the sort of framing that, oh, your mom, she's just emotionally immature. Oh, your husband, he's just emotionally immature. And it's not just that. That then means that the person in the relationship may then start to feel like they're being too judgmental or making too big a deal out of the problematic patterns in the relationship. And it's just a little immaturity, and that they need to stop reacting to it. They're just being immature. But it's not that. It's important you be clear on the difference. And many of you have probably been through both kinds of relationships and may feel the difference. If you are in a full-on, full-blown narcissistic relationship, it is different. And that's not to say that an adult relationship with an emotionally immature person or a child relationship with an emotionally immature adult is a walk in the park. It's not. Like I said, being raised by an emotionally immature parent can actually be quite unhealthy. But it is not the pronounced emotional harm, and in some cases relational trauma, that happens to people who experience narcissistic relationships. Be clear on the difference. And if you do go to the amusement park, maybe take that emotionally immature friend with you, but be prepared to only go on the rides that they want. Thanks again.